Welcome back to District Late Start October.
You are listening to Grant Twyman and Susie Contos. As a reminder, this year for DISC, we will spend our time doing work in the process of mirrors, windows, systems, and self. We are on an equity journey. Our path is toward educational equity and to realize educational justice.
Today we will unveil the 7 steps on the path to educational equity for each area. In our September meeting, we introduced the 9 areas of focus for each school to choose a focus area for the year. We've been working to ensure equity and inclusion is aligned throughout the district. So we extended the same opportunity for departments to choose an area of focus and the school board of directors.
The 7 steps each school and department will go through to pursue equity are the following. Step 1, describe the issue. Step 2, identify the barriers. Step 3, identify the outcomes. Step 4, research, assess, and analyze data. Step 5, identify the strategies. Step 6, resource allocation. And Step 7, accountability and implementation. Each team has some flexibility in how they approach this work and navigate each step. Keep in mind, these steps should not be rushed just to check a box. The steps are designed to guide a process that will lead to an outcome. A powerful note to think about before we all begin this specific focus is that sometimes the process is just as important as the outcome. As we work to achieve inclusion, equity, and educational justice, it's important to practice equity and inclusion along the journey. For example, Step 4 is about strategies. This is not a new process for us as professionals in our field of education, but let's ensure we are practicing equity and inclusion in that step by inviting diverse voices to the table of decisions. Let's elevate and empower voices that are typically left out or marginalized. And so here's a critical question. How do we practice equity and inclusion in every step along the way? As you assemble your teams, your staff, your stakeholders, and constituents, let that question frame your work. Not to stop or halt conversations, but use it as a catalyst to be dynamic, think outside the box, innovate, and create unique solutions to student success. One of the things that may come to mind along this process is, how long do you expect this to take? I love this question, but am also challenged by the question. Let's be clear. We are talking about the pace of change at an organizational level, a systems level. How long does it take for a system to change? Maybe a better question is, who upholds the systems that we are aiming to change? I think the answer is people. We do. It's all of us. So look in the mirror, as our superintendent Ron Banner would say. It's not enough to just point outside of ourselves or at other people. We have to look at ourselves. We uphold and maintain these systems that are reproducing inequities and exclusions every year. Not all of them, but for sure some of them. So what are we prepared to do? What are we prepared to question and change? Who are we actively advocating for? How are we partnering with our students and families to advocate for change that may exist even outside of our particular authority or influence? Also, since people uphold systems, it calls into question our willingness to change, which is why we have to spend time reflecting on the mirror, window, systems, and self. It for sure is a cycle. Here's another thing to consider. When processing change and the pace of change, let's make sure that the table is very diverse. For example, the older generation tends to appreciate change over time and change that comes slowly. The younger generation tends to prefer immediate change right now. How do we have an honest conversation? I think we have to diversify that table to include both the younger and older generation to talk about the pace of change. Additionally, if we're talking about an area that is riddled with racial disparities, the pace of change, that conversation needs to have racial diversity because you need people who are feeling the weight of the area not changing. If the table of decision making is full of people unaffected by status quo, it's really easy for the work to become stagnant and stall. So you need people at your table that have both historically and presently felt the weight of unjust systems. So let's practice equity and inclusion at each step along the way.
Step 1. Describe the issue. This step is designed to draft initial notes and discussion about the specific area of focus. Here are some questions that should guide your discussion and documented findings. Ensure you document who provided feedback, and ensure you document the importance of choosing this area of focus.
Remember, one of our components of equity is identifying and removing barriers. So step 2 in our path to educational equity is identifying barriers in your specific area of focus. Here are some questions to guide your discussion and documented findings. Keep in mind, it's important to explore barriers in terms of the mirror, which demands we ask, how are we in the way?
Step 3 is identifying outcomes. This step is huge. At this point, it's okay to document goals along with outcomes. It is also appropriate to document short-term and long-term goals. Remember, policies and practices are inequitable, unjust, and racist because of its outcomes, what they produce. We rarely create policies or school practices with words or language that excludes certain groups, but the outcomes or results of our practices can be exclusive to certain groups. Be sure to be explicit in your outcomes and goals. Step 4 asks us to research, assess, and analyze data. For this step, think of data you may already have before you start crafting requests for more or different data. Do you have any survey data related to your area of focus? Do you have stories or examples of incidences or events related to this area of focus?
Step 5, identifying strategies. In this step, you should thoughtfully craft strategies that achieve our desired outcomes and goals. Be careful coming up with strategies and presenting them to diverse stakeholders for their approval or cosign. If we want to truly be collaborative, let's approach the conversation looking to co-create and co-design. Part of that is practicing equity and practicing inclusion. Step 6, resource allocation. As you approach the topic of resource allocation, keep in mind these 3 areas or these 3 questions before you list requests. What resources are presently available to advance equity in this area? What resources are needed to implement your strategies to remove barriers to pursue equity and inclusion? Identify partnerships with CBOs, which are community-based organizations, to support your equity pursuits.
Our final step, Step 7, is accountability and implementation. As a reminder, the process can be just as important as the outcome. Other questions to guide your work in Step 7 are: how will you evaluate progress or success? What stakeholders are part of your accountability plan? Are they students, families, community members? What role does consistent and thorough communication play in your pathway to educational equity? How are you telling your story internally? And how are you telling your story externally?
Those are the 7 steps that we begin intentionally and focused on the area that we've chosen. Here I'll spend 2 minutes giving an overview of our timeline and a way to approach the process. So during the October District Late Start, you want to ensure you accomplish 3 things. Review the 7 steps by watching this video. Assign staff groups to begin initial work in steps 1, 2, 3, and 4. Each group should identify a lead planner and organizer. Let the groups go to work. The December District Late Start will have some structured and concentrated time allocated for the groups to document their findings for the step that they've been assigned to work on. The next Late Start is not until February. The teams need to collaborate with their administrator to share their initial findings with the whole staff before the February Late Start. The whole staff should be given an opportunity to give constructive feedback insight, and additional perspective. It's at the February district late start that the groups will brief the whole staff the final draft of their findings for steps 1, 2, 3, and 4. At the end of that meeting, groups will be assigned steps 5, 6, and 7 to repeat the process.